let's move on because, well, what I wanted to do is that next week is obviously two big matches. We have the Rome derby and we have Derby d'Italia. So I think we should go to Lazio next because this is a really bizarre game. Salernitana are just this kind of side that it's impeccable. It's not impeccable. It's almost, well, it's incredible in the sense that they really know how to raise their game against the big boys. They obviously managed to get a 2-goal lead against Juventus at their home and really surprised them. And, well, obviously afterwards, referees just ruined everything. But with Lazio was so comfortable in the first half, collected already a 1-0 lead. They are still without Immobile, and they had decided not to bring on Milinković-Savić because obviously there is a big game coming up and one more yellow card would mean he'd be banned. But then they got a marvelous goal, Salernitana, with Candreva, one that even Fabregas applauded him for it. Stunning goal from Candreva. They're 1-1. And then Sarri decides to introduce Milinković-Savić. It's a disaster. Salernitana get 2 more. Milinković-Savić gets a yellow card, who, for me, in every single way, did not merit that yellow card. And it means that he will be missing for the Rome derby. Lazio had only conceded 5 goals coming into this game. They were, for me, the second best side after Napoli in terms of play, execution, understanding of their roles. And it just all fell apart. I mean, did Davide Nicola really study so well to have performed and understood exactly what destroys the opponent? Or is this Sarri's team being a little bit arrogant about who they were facing?
I think there's a bit from pot A, a bit from pot B, and maybe a bit from a third pot C as well, Mina. Honestly, there's so much that goes on in the second half of this game, particularly, that I almost sort of don't know where I sort of want to start. And I think the obvious place probably is the Milinković-Savić part of it, because that's a whole fascinating dynamic in its own. And it kind of echoes what I was saying about where Milan sort of not focused because of their 2 Champions League games. But I think that Sarri himself, one of my favorite things about Sarri, he has lots of faults, but he's just such a straight talker. And I think he was really actually quite blunt about his mistakes at the end of the game. He was very angry about the refereeing, which we can get to, but he also effectively said, look, I got into my own head about the Milinković-Savić situation, and going back, I wish I hadn't done it. Sometimes when you're thinking about the derby just has this power and it gets into your skin and it makes you do stupid things. Because in the end, if you start Milinković-Savić in this game and he gets booked, but you win the game, well, you get 3 points, which is the same that you can get from that game against Roma. Whereas if you lose this game and then you don't have him against Roma, you've lost both ways, right? You've done yourself in both directions. And I think his sort of candidness on that point, I really admired that, literally saying, the derby got into my head. I wish it hadn't, but it did. But yeah, I think that the whole game is essentially it's like a little mini psychodrama that Lazio had, because they weren't great in the first half without Milinković-Savić and Immobile. You wouldn't expect them to be. But they're 1-0 up. They're in control. Vecino should score at the start of the second half. He doesn't. And then Candreva scores this great goal. And this comes to the merits of Nicola and Torino, because he said afterwards, we literally worked on this move on Friday in training. This was the move we worked on. And he changed his formation, right? Because Candreva normally starts outside on the right-hand side, and he moved him inside to be the mezzala, and he had Mazzocchi move outside to be the wing back. Yeah. And it was like Candreva knew exactly where to be between those 2 Lazio defenders. He found that space and he punished it perfectly. So that was a planned move, good coaching, good execution, success story. The second goal, which is before Milinković-Savić gets booked, feels a bit more coincidental. It's a cross that goes in, it's badly dealt with, and Napoli concede it. And then the booking happens, and Milinković-Savić is completely within his rights to feel hard done by on this. I think it's a terrible decision. There's literally nothing he can do. He's carrying the ball forward. He tries to lay it off, and Bron comes in at such speed, arrives late. There's literally nowhere else for Milinković-Savic's boot to go. When you watch it on a slow motion replay, sure, you can see his studs go down, but that's just because that's the way he's going. He's not moved into the player at all. Bron's the one who puts his foot there. So it's a terrible decision. But at the moment when that happens, Lazio just completely lose their heads. I mean, that's it. Like, that's the end of the game at that point, because Lazio are gone. Everyone is furious. Everyone knows that Milinković-Savić is going to be out next week. Catania nearly talks his way into a red card. The whole thing, Cataldi, sorry, not Catania. The whole thing just goes to pieces. And the third goal they concede is ridiculous, because there's Diaz in the box with 3 Lazio defenders and no other attackers in the box, and Diaz still finds space to score because they've gone to pieces. And it's amazing because you alluded to it, Mina. They have the best defensive record in the division, Lazio. But like, actually, the previous 6 games, to be specific about it, the previous 6 games, their aggregate score they had was 14-0. 14 goals scored, none conceded, and they conceded 3.5 against Salernitana, who, respect to Nicola, he's doing a great job, but it's Salernitana. You don't concede 3.5 to them. So it's an astonishing game of football, really entertaining. As a neutral, I'm certain incredibly aggravating as a Lazio fan, because the Milinković-Savić decision was terrible. But yeah, I felt like it was a real mental coming apart for Lazio, which exploited well by Salernitana, but it definitely felt more on that side of it to me than the other side.
God, Nicky, that was such a good explanation. And I just
bit of a monologue.
But it was brilliant. Like, I have nothing to add. It really does seem so. Like, you love this game. Like, that was, if you didn't understand anything, even just the tactics of Mazzocchi and just explaining that, like, Candreva was a Mazziale. The one thing that I think is interesting is you said Davide Nicola and Torino, which means that you still did a Freudian slip, because obviously
Davide my God,
Nicola.
Sorry, did I say that?
But you did end it with, this is Salernitana. So.
I did. Sorry, everybody.
But no, that was brilliant. I mean, there's really very little to add, because that's exactly how Davide Nicola. It does amaze me that this is a team that suffered so much against Lecce, and then and has suffered in some games that I just think that you're so much better than this, and then pulls out these amazing performances against the big boys. It's almost like Davide Nicola really gives his heart out, and the players just want to prove a point about who they are. So I thought that was interesting, and to do it away from home is really fantastic, just like against Juve. But it was
they've won 3 out of their last 4 now. That's a run, like 3 out of 4 wins for a team like Salernitana. It's big results.